There are multiple ways to keep in touch with the Wolf Connection podcast. Through our Instagram handle, the Wolf Connection Pod, and for comments and questions, send us an email to podcast@wolfconnection.org with your comments, questions, and guest ideas for Stephen and myself. You may hear your question answered on an upcoming podcast. Thank you for your support, and howls to you all. Welcome to the Wolf Connection podcast. I'm your host, John Calfa. Let's talk about some moles. So we've been admiring these photographs on this particular Instagram for a while now, and we're very excited to have this particular photographer on the podcast today. She has her own website, Little Lightning Nature. If you don't follow her on Instagram, I highly advise that you do so. Steve and I were checking through the photos we're going to discuss today, and they are incredible. And we'll get to all of those. But she is Julia Cook. Julia, it's wonderful to meet you and see you in person. How's everything going?
Great. And thanks again for having me on. I'm excited to talk more and all things wildlife and wolves. So
yeah, absolutely. I was reading your bio before we started everything, and you really were in nature right from the jump. You lived right outside of Yellowstone. What was that like for you as a child to be immersed in that environment right off the bat? And how did that play into you becoming a wildlife photographer?
Yeah, so I grew up in Cody, and so it's kind of a running joke when we travel places. No one ever knows where Cody is. So I always say like 50 miles away from Yellowstone, and then people kind of have a general idea. But I mean, being so close to Yellowstone, it's like the best part of growing up there. And, you know, every year on opening day, for as long as I can remember, my family and I would like drive into the park and, you know, go see the lower falls and, you know, drive through, look at the bison and just anything nature related in Yellowstone. And, you know, then in the summers going fishing and camping and just being around in nature. And to me, that was just like a normal childhood, you know, and even outside of Yellowstone, you know, just nature was always so close, even in town, basically, that, you know, I'd go running around down the river below my house. And it was just great being so submerged in nature. And to me, I didn't ever know anything different. So definitely was really influential for me.
What was there any particular event that happened when you were young that sticks in your mind of going, that was the switch of saying, I want to be this photographer. I want to share all the experiences that I have with everyone else. Was there something that stuck with you when you were younger?
I mean, I've always loved wildlife, like ever since I was young, and I didn't really get started in wildlife photography until like 3 or 4 years ago. But I definitely think that I do wildlife photography just because I love wildlife so much, which definitely started as a young age. And, you know, I always say like, I don't remember seeing my first grizzly bear or like my first wolf, that it was always just something that like, you know, it was sort of normalized for me anyways. And so then traveling and talking to more people, I'm like, wow, that is like amazing that, you know, that all of that is just right there in my backyard, and really wanting to then share that with people that don't really have as easy access to nature as I do.
Yeah. What do you think it's like for you when somebody comments on a photograph of yours, and it impacts them in a way that maybe you didn't think? Because you're just taking these beautiful photos, you're showing them to the world. And what does it mean when someone actually comments and says, hey, this photo touched me in a certain way? What is that like for you as someone who goes and is able to share this stuff with everyone that's outside of your purview?
Yeah, I mean, for me, it definitely brings in like another layer of like meaning to my photos, that, you know, I like capturing like the emotions or just day-to-day life of the animals that I photograph. But then when someone says something like that, or recently I had someone email me and say that they were planning a trip to Yellowstone just from seeing my photos, which was like really impactful for me to know that I'm, you know, influencing people to visit somewhere that I love so much. So it's definitely really cool and really meaningful to me.
So right now you're in Wyoming, you're finishing up your studies, environmental and natural resources. You're getting your bachelor's. How are you looking to use, I guess, the education that you're getting to influence how you're doing your photography? Is there any correlation between that, or is it something that you really are passionate about that you want to expand and expound upon?
Yeah, so my degree is pretty unique, that it's like kind of a blend between like communications and science. It's like really interdisciplinary. So for me, it's like much more of a focus on like, how do we educate people about the environment and kind of environmental communications to like the general public instead of a really, you know, scientific based audience. So for me, I try to incorporate some of the things I've learned just through like even like social media and stuff like that to make stuff accessible to people and knowledge about wildlife in a way that's interesting, but also maybe a little bit creative as well.
So what are some of the things that you're learning that you want to apply? So you're talking about social media. What's something that you're taking from the course that you're going to apply right away, even whether it's through, like I said, your photography or learning or showing other people how to approach wildlife and be with wildlife in these awesome places like Yellowstone?
Yeah, so one of my classes that I'm in right now, it's kind of like the senior capstone thesis class for my degree. And we're working a lot with like talking with local communities and trying to find problems within the state of Wyoming with management for outdoor recreation and wildlife and all sorts of different aspects with that. And trying to find different solutions to work with communities and make it really community-based solutions, which is definitely something that, I think I'm really interested in, especially in Wyoming and especially in relation to wildlife. So trying to take some of the aspects that I've learned and apply it with photography and incorporate photography as a way to like get the wider message out about conservation needs and different ways that we can manage wildlife and just nature in general here in Wyoming.
I'm looking at your Instagram here, and I just don't get it. It's amazing how, like, photography is hard in general. Like, I mean, there could be animals in your backyard and they're almost impossible to get good photos of, but yet you just have these stunning photos of all these, some just incredibly rare species that, I mean, what do you look for before you go out? Are you scouting? Are you using a digital map? Like, how do you select locations? And then what's your process? You're out there before sunrise, you're out there after sunset. I mean, a lot of these animals are crepuscular. How, just describe how you're making your way to these locations and choosing these locations and scouting for these animals and setting yourself up to get these kinds of just incredibly rare shots.
I think growing up in the area was definitely like really influential when I was starting out, just as far as like knowing where wildlife is. So I think that could be kind of a leg up compared to someone who is completely new in the area. But really just going off of trends as to like where I see wildlife and different times of day as well. Definitely mornings and evenings tend to be the best, especially like lighting wise, but same with like wildlife activity. And in Yellowstone, definitely less crowded as well. So most days, I'm not really a morning person. I usually say that I'm not a morning person unless I'm getting up to go see bears or something. Right. But most of the time, I leave town, 3 or 4 in the afternoon in the middle of the summer and go just for like the late evening and be driving home in the dark. Occasionally I'd go for like the full day, before sunrise, clear until after sunset, but less frequently than I just do the afternoons. I tend to think that the afternoons are better in terms of wildlife activity, but that's just my experience.
Yeah. So, I mean, you have a picture here of 3 moose on a ridge. I mean, how do you get that photo?
Yeah, so that was an interesting kind of scenario. I was down in the Tetons hoping to photograph moose, and that's kind of the big animal that I go there to photograph. There's more moose down there than in Yellowstone, and they were all kind of grouped together in maybe like 12 or 15 moose all in a cluster. So it wasn't great for photos. And I tend to like the close-up portraits just because you can kind of see like the emotions of that animal. So it wasn't great for that. I just decided to hang out a little bit and see what would happen. And the moose kind of gradually started working their way up the hillside. And I was like, please line up in a line and don't get all, clumped together. And they finally did. And the 3 were all lined up like that, wow. Which I think was a nice kind of environmental shot. And the moose were listening to me in that moment.
Yeah. I mean, but also, so you have this fox that is in the middle of hunting. And I mean, I'm sure a lot of folks have seen fox in the wild, but to be in such a position where one is actively hunting and you're getting this incredibly clear and sharp photo of it, you had to have been sitting somewhere for a long time waiting for this to happen, or you scout, there's a fox in the area that lives in the area, and so then you continuously go back to set up to try to get this, or that's kind of what I'm getting at is, that like that moment right there. I mean, I've been to Yellowstone and seen fox just off in the distance in a snowstorm, and I've been like, wow, man, I'd love to be close enough to get that photo. But as soon as I move, that thing's going to be, I mean, rightfully so, out of there. So yeah. How do you set up for something like that? I mean, you're just waiting a long time, or you keep revisiting the site, or?
So most of my fox photos actually are from like the same family group of foxes. There's a mated pair that I've seen quite frequently over the last like 2 years in the same general area. And often they'll cross the road and kind of cut into a little open meadow before going back into the trees. So I photographed several different times, and this specific photo of the fox midair was one that I had really wanted. But there was either like not enough snow, or there'd be their rear end towards me and not a side profile. So on this particular day, this was actually the last day that Yellowstone was open for the season this last winter. So I was kind of just driving around hoping to see something, and one of the foxes ran across the road in front of me. So I stopped my car and kind of got out and was watching as it was mousing in this meadow. And I got out and was able to photograph it a few different times. So it was really cool.
I just can't, like photographers like you who get these kind of photos, I just can't help but think to be in the right place at the right time to kind of attract these moments in these places. I just can't help but think there's there's some magic there. But I mean, just awesome photos. That fox one is really, really, I mean, they're all amazing. They're unreal.
Thank you.
Yeah.
No, I agree. It's almost like you guys have an energy. I think it's Stephen as well. Yeah, it's just that you guys are, like you say, in the right place in the right time with the right sunlight. It's amazing. It seems easy, and I know it's not easy because we try to take pictures of our pack that's in a sanctuary, that's in habitats or dens, and it sometimes is nearly impossible, and yet you guys are out in the elements taking these incredible shots. I mean, we might as well jump because we're talking about photos. We might as well go right into it. I mean, first of all, want to congratulate you on, because you got the cover of Outdoor Photographer, and I was showing Stephen this before, and he was like, "This shot is just wild." And those of you that are listening, you can look along. So we're gonna have these 3 photos in the post and also in the description. So you guys please take a look at these. So you get what we're talking about. But the first one is. It's a collared wolf with this raven that is, I mean, a foot, maybe 2 feet over top of this thing, and it's in mid-flight. Just describe to everyone that scenario, like Stephen was saying, like where you were at, how that all came about, and just what it took for that shot to just come into focus for you, and ultimately you got this beautiful shot.
Yeah, so this was last winter in Yellowstone, and I had actually skipped a week of school because I wanted to go up to Yellowstone for my birthday. And in the end, I'm glad I did. And I have no regrets for skipping that week of school. This photo was actually on my birthday, and I had spent a week seeing absolutely nothing. It was like dead quiet in Yellowstone. I had photographed bison, and that was about it. And so I really wanted to photograph wolves, and ended up seeing the Wapiti Lake Pack. And they had taken down a deer kind of in this little creek bed, kind of in a little gully. And by the time I got there, they had pretty well picked it over, and the pack had retreated up onto the ridgeline where they were napping, and occasionally would kind of come and sit on the ridge and look back down towards the carcass, which is what the wolf in this photo was doing. And since it had been pretty picked over, the ravens started to fly in. So I just had my camera up trying to get a portrait of this wolf when this raven flew directly over the wolf. And what I really love is that neither one of them seems bothered that the other one's there, but they're both looking in the same direction, down towards this carcass. And I don't know, it's one of my favorite photos that I've taken, and just the story of it, and kind of shows to me how connected wolves are to every element of the natural world.
What do you think makes this photo noteworthy? Why do you think this photo, is impactful? Because it clearly is, but what as the person who captured it, what do you think makes this photo noteworthy and special?
I think for me, growing up in Wyoming, in every science class, we always, hear about the reintroduction of the wolves, which was obviously really, really important to the whole ecosystem. But there's not really any context. It's just facts of, the wolves came and this happened and this happened. But it almost is the wolves are connected to everything, but in a really not very natural way, or not in a deep, meaningful way, that they're just there because they're supposed to be. But for this photo, to me, it shows just how deep the connections run between wolves and every other animal in the Yellowstone ecosystem. And the relationship that they have with the ravens is one that I've always been so fascinated with, that the ravens will follow the wolves to kills and kind of pick off their carcasses. And it's just something that I've always wanted to see and had never really seen before this, let alone to be able to photograph it. So it was a really cool moment.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah, what is that? Because you were touching a little bit on your that you always wanted to photograph wolves, and you have And Steven's not wrong. I mean, I'm scrolling through and looking at stuff as he's talking with you. I mean, your bears, I think, were one of the things that you had mentioned in your bio, that you love photographing bears, and you have some awesome grizzly shots. What's the attraction with, well, I guess for both wolves and bears, because they are different, but they're equally as important on the landscape. So was it a parallel draw or attraction to both, or did the bear feed into the wolf, or vice versa? How did that kind of go for you in terms of looking for these specific species and falling in love in terms of taking photographs of them?
I think for me, it's that they're both really, really misunderstood animals, and especially like the way that they're portrayed in like the media through like movies and stuff like that. They're both really misunderstood. And I think for me, photographing them has been like a way to show people like, you know, the true bear or the true wolf, that, you know, their bears aren't really like stalking you in the woods and, you know, like people think that they are. And they have all these interesting and intricate relationships and behaviors, and they all have unique personalities, which for me has been something that I've really enjoyed being able to photograph. Yeah.
I mean, I want to touch on the second one, since we're on the photos. So I can keep that rolling. The second one you sent us, it's this collared wolf that's kind of like right behind a tree, and just sort of, it looks like it's off the side. I don't know if it was alone for that moment, or what was, again, just describe that experience. What were you feeling in that moment? Was it a different season? Where was that one being taken, and what was the story behind that particular shot that you were able to grab?
Yeah, so that's actually one of my first photos that I have of wolves that I was like happy with. And that was 2 years ago, I think. And all summer, I was like, I have to photograph wolves. And I mean, I was just chasing wolves all summer, and I'd be somewhere like an hour after the wolves were there. And it was like so close every single time, but I just kept missing them. And so finally I said, I'm done chasing the wolves. If I see one, I'll see one. And this was the very next day, which was really pretty cool to me, that I was like, finally, I saw my wolf. But it was in an area where I had never really seen wolves before. And it was in this like middle of July, which is not really a great time to see wolves either. And it was pretty late in the evening, and I saw something run across the road. And at first I thought it was a deer, and then realized it was a wolf. So I stopped my car and jumped out, and I got this one photo before the wolf ran away, which to me was a really successful encounter with photographing wolves, because it was obviously not habituated and still very fearful of people, which was definitely a good sign to know that it is a really wild wolf. And also the fact that it has a collar on. I know a lot of people complain about having the collars on wolves, and a lot of people will edit them out of their photos. But to me, that's just become such like a normal part of the reintroduction of wolves, and it just shows how successful they've been with the reintroduction.
I mean, I think you kind of just, you started answering it there, that you almost gave up looking for the right wolf photo, and then it just sort of happened. But does it happen often that you get a great photo, or at least the moment is there, but you're just too far away to make it work? I mean, it's blurry, it's pixelated. I mean, you've got to be pushing camera settings sometimes, and still having to push the detail in post editing to get this kind of sharpness out of photos this far. I mean, does it happen often that you're just like looking through thousands of photos, and it's just too far away?
Yeah, most of the time, actually, when I see wolves, they're so far away and through binoculars or spotting scopes that I won't even like attempt to photograph them. But I will, stay a while and look and see what they're up to. So it's maybe 2 or 3 times a year that I'm able to get good photos of wolves. So not very often.
It's just time. It's just dedication and going out constantly.
Yeah. I mean, what's the before we get to the third one that you sent us? Because I'll get Steven here, because he usually asks this question. But what's the gear that you're using? Because are you using a long range lens? Are you Canon, Nikon? I mean, it's cool to kind of hear what photographers in the field are using. So what's your camera of choice and all the things that you're using when you're out there?
Yeah, so I use a Canon R5, which has been great because of the autofocus on it. And also it has such high resolution that I can crop in a lot farther to get kind of some of those close-up photos when a wolf wasn't necessarily as close as it looks like it was. And then I've recently started using a Canon 300mm f2.8 lens, and often with teleconverters with that. So I'm excited to get that into Yellowstone this spring and photograph some bears and wolves and everything with that.
Do you photograph in other places? I mean, obviously the Tetons in Yellowstone have to be the best spot in town, but do you have other places you like to shoot photos that you've had good outcomes?
Yeah, mostly Yellowstone and the Tetons and the surrounding national forests as well. But every fall, I try to go down to Rocky Mountain National Park in Colorado to photograph the elk rut down there. And there's definitely some places I'd like to go photograph wildlife that I haven't yet. And this last fall, I went up to Alaska for about a month and photographed up there, which was incredible.
What did you photograph up in Alaska?
Mostly bears was what I was after up there, which was incredible.
I've heard that when you're shooting grizzlies or when you're shooting brown bears and they're eating salmon, they kind of just don't care that you're there. Has that been your experience? Like you were able to shoot them without them? There's so much food, they're not concerned.
Yeah. It was really interesting comparing the way that you're able to photograph bears in Yellowstone compared to Alaska. Because in Alaska, they have so much salmon that they like don't care that you're there. They can walk like right past you and it's totally safe because they don't care. Whereas in Yellowstone, they're a lot more aggressive because they don't have that's food source with the salmon. So it was kind of jarring at first. I'm like, this bear can walk like a couple yards past you and it's fine.
Unnerving.
But
yeah.
It is.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's incredible. What was one? So you were getting them. So was it is it called not the salmon route? What's it called? Were you up there when the salmon were coming up? Yeah. Were you up there for that? Yeah. So you were up there for that. Man, how wild is that just to see? Because I always see it on National Geographic and just the salmon themselves. Like take the bears out of the picture, but the amount of salmon that are flying up these river, like to me in and of itself, that's got to be an incredible view just to see in and of itself.
Yeah, it was incredible. And I started out in Juneau, where that was the first place that I saw the salmon run. And I mean, it like blew my mind that a friend of mine and I went down to a creek to look at the salmon. And, we were standing in the water and the fish would be like bumping into our legs. And you couldn't even see the bottom of the creek because there were just so many fish. It was crazy.
Wow. So they're not working that hard to get calories, bears.
Yeah,
out there.
It's pretty easy.
The cool part about, like I'm looking at this other one here. Yeah, this is Alaska. Yeah, salmon. So there's a grizzly bear with a salmon in its mouth. It's really cool because you get this unusual. I mean, from a photographer standpoint, you get this unusual like red and green like pop of color from a bear photo that just makes it look so unique.
Thank you.
I know. We're just gonna. By the way, if your Instagram following,
you got it. I mean, you got it. But you have a definitely. It looks like I don't know, but it looks like you have like a thematic. Like you have a theme of how you like to edit, or at least it's just the recent ones. Maybe it's just because it's winter. It's very like it has that cooler blue white balance, and it looks like maybe you remove like yellow a lot of times from the images. Is that for just a reason, or you just like how this like icy look is?
I try to like post my photos from like the season and like I try to look at like the overall like most dominant colors in photos. So for winter, it's mostly like the white and blues.
Blue, yeah.
And I try to like kind of alternate them. So it kind of, like unifies my Instagram feed. And same with like the summer between like green and yellow and stuff like that. So
that's wild. Yeah. And the ungulates that you have, I mean, some of these elk photos, these ram photos, I mean, goodness, they're just, I could sit on the Instagram, I could sit on your page all day and just look at this stuff. Cause it's it's really enveloping and you really give the feel of that you're looking, or this animal is either looking at you or you're in this scene with them. So that's something else that clearly you're really, really good at doing. Yeah.
And these mountain goats, I mean, they have to be in wild places when we were in Yellowstone last with the podcast, I got a photo of some goats, and it's, I mean, you might as well not even I mean, they're not even there in terms of, I mean, you just see like a mountainside because they're on this cliff basically that it would take you hours to get up there in the first place. And you'd hope that they were there. But I mean, how are you chasing goats like this? How do you come across, I mean, these goats are in wild spots.
Yeah. So most of my goat photos have been from the Beartooth Mountains, which is just outside of Yellowstone, kind of on the border of Wyoming and Montana. And it's definitely driving that. It's like my favorite drive anywhere around Yellowstone. You can see like forever and it's incredible. But driving up there, the snow doesn't melt for so long. So most of my photos have been like June, July.
Wow.
But there's still that much snow there. And so trying to like find a white goat on like a white snow background, sometimes challenging. But I always say bears and wolves are my favorite, but there's something about the mountain goats too. They just have I don't know, their facial expressions, they're so charismatic. I
Yeah,
love them.
they are really cool
That's
looking.
wild. That is awesome. The last one, the last wolf photo you gave us that you shared was it's the Wapiti, it's the pack, which this one is, to me, is awesome because you have it looks like you got three, I think there's three black phases and the rest are grays and timbers, but it just, again, I think like Steven was saying, the colors are so vibrant, it just in that pack in and of itself. And I just noticed now, I noticed it before and I want to bring it up too, is you had the one wolf sort of standing off to the side. What was this like for you to take to find this and grab this photo as well? Because to get, a pack of wolves there is pretty, obviously it's tough to get one, but to get multiple in there to get them in play has got to be awesome.
Yeah, so this was like 2 years ago and still by far like the best wolf watching day that I've had. I mean, it was incredible. It was almost the entire Wapiti Lake pack, which at the time was like 30 something wolves. And to start out, I mean, there were just a couple. And I watched them for several hours and it'd be like, here comes a couple more wolves. And the wolves kind of just kept appearing out of the trees. And it was just so amazing to watch them interact with each other and greet each other and play. And most of the time they were just napping. But I mean, it was an incredible day. And I'm so grateful to my friend Kate, who was there and texted me about it. And that's the only reason I would have missed it otherwise if she hadn't let me know. Yeah, it was a great day. And there were a couple other people there as well. And, some tourists that were stopping to, see what we were looking at. And to me, it was just like the whole day was just like, this is how, wolves can bring people together. And at one point there was like a elementary age kid that came up and was asking, and he goes, I wanted to come to Yellowstone and all I wanted to see were wolves and hear the wolves, and rambling off all of these facts about wolves. And I mean, it was just great seeing how everyone was just equally as excited that the wolves were there. So it was a great day.
I mean, what does it mean for you to be able to share your passion for wolves and photographing them with, like you said, you had an elementary school kid there, just to have that community type feeling whenever you're out? Do you find that as a benefit? Is it something that you're fully enveloped in now, and that you're part of this large reaching faction of individuals that are really tending to these wild animals and making sure that they're being able to be viewed for all?
Yeah. So, I mean, I love talking to people and just hearing people come from everywhere to Yellowstone. And a lot of them, just want to see Old Faithful and the canyon and all that, and kind of more or less rush around from, can't miss location to the next. But there's a large amount too that just come really specifically for wildlife, and again, like specifically for wolves too. And especially people that had heard on the news and saw all the news live of the reintroduction, then have now years later come to see the wolves in Yellowstone. I mean, it's amazing talking to people and just seeing how you don't have to live somewhere like Yellowstone to feel that same connection with wolves and wild animals just in general, which has been really powerful for me.
The goal on your, I saw this and I had to write this down, and I want to read it back to you. The goal on your website is you want to capture impactful images of native wildlife that highlights the wildness of the American West. Where does that feeling for you come from? Is that something from childhood, or is that something that you've grown into that you want to put out into the world now that you're an established photographer?
I think kind of a mix of both. As far as like growing up, I feel like I definitely took Yellowstone for granted as a kid, and like I loved it, but I think that I didn't realize how lucky I was to like live there. And like definitely as a kid too, I think I very much was like ready to graduate high school and like leave and not like stay in Wyoming, which switched once I got into photography. I was like, now I'm to the point I'm like, I'm never leaving Wyoming. I mean, I love it here. But being able to take photos that show kind of the deeper emotions and connections and behavior of these animals, and just put that out for people to be able to see and know that these wild places still exist, and try to like inspire others to get out in nature, even if it's just like a local park wherever they live, and also trying to inspire people to contribute to like different conservation efforts for wildlife.
What's your take on, because you're a native Wyoming, what is your take on a lot of the legislation that goes on? Because clearly it's always in the news. You're in the part of the West where there's legislative battles back and forth, and obviously, and you're studying something that is impactful in terms of environment and natural resources. How do you feel that you're able to impact, like what's your feeling on it? And then how do you feel you're able to impact change going forward? Because a lot of these things are so political, a lot of it is so divisive. How do you see yourself as a conduit for the wildlife side of it?
I mean, I definitely try to post photos that show more like the realness of bears and wolves, that they're, again, not like what the media always kind of portrays them to be, but also trying to like put a message with, just news of what's going on in the state. I recently posted a photo of a bear and talking just my thoughts on the whole push to delist grizzlies in Wyoming, which I don't know, it's really complicated because I feel like it's a valid argument when they go off of the numbers. They say that, the population has surpassed the initial goal, which it's like, well, that's good, that should be celebrated. But the automatic response shouldn't just be like, well, now we can hunt them again, And I feel like the whole way that we manage wildlife kind of needs to be modernized. That for the longest time, I think hunting was really the main way that people interacted with wildlife, which it isn't really anymore, but the management doesn't really reflect that or reflect the fact that wildlife has even more monetary value when it's alive than necessarily for trophy hunting or something like that, which I don't think state management really even acknowledges at all.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's interesting because you yourself, Kate Oxman, Arthur Leffel, the band of photographers that we've had on this podcast already really embody this message of coexistence and ethical photography and not baiting. And it's really refreshing because I'm sure there are photographers out there, and I'm not poo-pooing on anybody's parade here, but just the fact that you all stay true to the wildness of every shot that you're looking to take, and you're not really, endangering whatever animal it is that you're trying to take just for the sake of getting the shot. And it really just shows, as Stephen has mentioned, energetically, these animals are just putting themselves in place for you, and you're just able to grab these incredible shots. I mean, it's got to be, now that you're a couple years into it, or 2 or 3 years in, does it feel easier for you, or is it still a grind to get to the places that you want to get to, or does it just feel like something that you love to do more often than not?
I think most of it, I mean, like I said, I do it because I love the wildlife, and every single day when I head into Yellowstone, it's just the sense of joy that I get of having absolutely no idea what could happen, but the thing could happen is like, I mean, it's almost addicting. Like, I love that feeling, having no idea what could happen, but just trying to put myself in the best place to get photos. And I think now trying to think more of like different unique ways that I can photograph wildlife in a different sense that I have previously, whether that's different interactions between different species or the same species, or just trying to put a unique spin on kind of the same kind of photos that I have captured in the past is kind of my goal going forward.
So if you were to give advice to someone who's getting into photography, they want to capture wildlife, what's a piece of advice or a couple pieces of advice you would give them if they were just starting out? Would it be about equipment? Would it be about the ethical side? What's the thing that Julia Cook would say to an up and coming photographer?
I think definitely stressing the importance of like knowing the species that you want to photograph and doing all you can to research their behavior, their diet, their body language is huge, especially going into the ethical component, and being able to read body language and identify when an animal could be a little bit stressed, and then pulling your presence away to keep that animal behaving as naturally as you can. And just, I think if you kind of go out blindly and have no idea what you're after, your chances of being successful are a lot lower than, if you have a specific goal in mind and have done your research to be successful in that.
So when did you do a deep dive on bears and wolves, and was that your ultimate focus? And did it spill over obviously into the elk, the moose, the coyote, the fox, everything else? Did you learn how to do that first off, and then you go, oh, this is easy. It's just, I'm going to replicate the process as I'm going to shoot these different species, capture these different species?
I think I learned more about the animals first, but I don't think it was intentional. Like, I was definitely that little kid that was like always reading, some science book and like rambling off random facts. So I think a lot of that I had just had an interest in since I was a kid, and had always just kind of been learning gradually about, different facts about the wildlife that I loved. And then kind of incorporating that into my photography once I got into photography. And then just also talking to other people as well, and hearing other people's experience and the advice that they have as well. And even just as simple as, I saw a bear last week at this time, and, stuff like that is really, really helpful as well. Just kind of getting a comprehensive view of, what's happening and when.
Well, who, if anyone, was there an influence for you photography wise or just wildlife wise that you followed, because obviously you're your own individual, the way that you shoot, the way you edit, the way you capture, but did anyone stand out for you in the very beginning about the way you wanted to approach this type of career and get into this wildlife photography angle?
Yeah. So when I was in high school, my biology teacher and environmental studies teacher was Amy Gerber, who's become a good friend of mine now. And she's a professional wildlife photographer. And so in high school, she'd always take kids on a trip to Yellowstone, usually like the freshman biology classes, and a lot of kids that had never been to Yellowstone before, which was a great way to people that have never been, to show them, what's in their backyard. So I did that through high school, and every year would kind of just tag along on every trip that she would take with kids. And then I went on a couple of field courses with her to Costa Rica and the Bahamas doing conservation work. And so then once I kind of started getting into photography, she was a big inspiration and definitely helped me. And I think was part of the reason I got hooked so quickly is she and I went on a trip down to the Tetons in the spring of 2020, trying to photograph bears. And we photographed, 20 something bears in 2 days, which was crazy. But just seeing, what's possible. I'd never really thought of photography as being anything other than a hobby before that. And I think from there, I was definitely really hooked. And just, we never really talked about technical settings or anything, but just the different ways that you can think about wildlife photography, and learning that from her has been great.
Man, when you're out there, is it something that brings you peace and tranquility that you get away from, or what is the general emotion that you feel once you're out there? Because a lot of people will maybe listening and say, boy, it's a lot for me to just get photographs of my family at a at a party or something like that. But they hear about the stories of photographers sitting out there for hours and hours and hours just to get one shot out of hundreds or thousands that are being taken. What does it mean for you to have that time out there? Because it's through you since a young age. But what's something that you can how can you explain it to someone who may not be able to understand that type of commitment or that type of development into an environment like that?
I think when I was first starting out, there was different photos that I had in my mind that I really wanted to photograph, and kind of became obsessed with those to the point where if I left Yellowstone without having really photographed anything, I kind of got bummed out, and I was like, it was a waste of a day. But now I'm like, well, I sit somewhere waiting for a bear and her cubs to come out, and she doesn't, but I still sat there all day, in the sun by a river. It is really calming and really peaceful. And trying to center that as being maybe I didn't photograph anything, but it was still a good day. I was still out in nature doing what I love, and just could have as easily been, in an office on a computer or something. Right. So definitely putting that into perspective.
And then for wolves, for you, what does it mean? I know you've said it in many different ways, but for wolves, I know it's conservation, I know it's everything else. On a level, what do they mean to you, that they're out there, that you're able to photograph them, that they've been part of this reintroduction story, and they're starting to expand across the West, and that you're a part of sharing these stories of the Wapiti pack or the Junction pack and things of that sort, that you're telling their story? Do you think about it in that way?
I do. And just I'm not as good with wolves as saying, well, that's number blah, 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 or whatever. But as far as packs go, and telling the story of packs, and especially the Wapiti pack and the legacy that they've had going back generations of wolves, has been incredible to kind of follow that along and kind of be a part of that, and telling their story, and kind of moving it beyond just the reintroduction. Everyone always talks about that because it's been so successful. But, what are the future of wolves now? Are we only going to confine them to the Yellowstone area, or, are there goals going forward to have them move into other areas where they haven't been for for 100 years. So I think about that a lot and trying to just give people a different perspective on wolves and hoping that people can kind of see a compromise either way.
I don't think I touched on this, but Little Lightning Nature, where did that come from?
Yeah, so my mom called me that as a kid, Little Lightning, and I don't really know why. I don't think I've ever asked, but I just thought it was kind of cool. And I didn't want to be the generic person that's like Julia Cook photography or, whatever. I wanted something a little bit more creative. I went with that.
No, I dig it. No, our parents usually come with some pretty cool nicknames sometimes. Yeah. But that's great. I mean, it's played into all of your work. So just give everybody the places where they can see. Are you selling any photographs at the moment? Are they able to go to your website, look at your Instagram? Like, where's a place that if people listen to this and they're going to look at those 3 photos that we spoke about, among others with the fox and everything else, just give everybody your website, your social details. Where can they follow you and check out all this amazing work that you're doing? Yeah,
so I do have prints listed on my website, which is littlelightningnature.com. I post the most on Instagram, which is julia.littlelightningnature. And I try to post a couple times a week on there. And then when I'm out in the field in Yellowstone, posting stories on, what I've seen, what I'm doing that day, stuff like that. So that's definitely the best place to see my work and stay up to date on everything.
Yeah, absolutely. And we're going to have all those details in the description. My last question for you, Julia, is when you hear the word wolf, what is the thing that comes to your mind?
I just think they're just so wild in a sense that like not really anything else is, at least for me. And like as a kid, I have like a few memories of seeing wolves that I remember. And it, again, not very often. So to me, wolves are just like the ultimate wild thing in the sense that you don't see them very often, which makes it even more worthwhile and exciting when you do.
We've heard that a couple of times, and it resonates differently every time. And it's fascinating that with all the wild things that are around the globe or even on this continent, that the wolf still embodies that it is the one thing that people say that truly encapsulates wild. And it's great to hear that every time that people from all different walks of life are just saying, man, if I'm out and I'm hunting for whatever it is, turkey or quail or whatever it is, or deer, and they go, if I know that wolves are around, Stephen has said this a couple of times, he goes, that's the true essence of it being wild. So that's just awesome that you feel that way, and and it shows in your work. So anybody who,
thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. So for those of you, we'll have all those links in the description, so you guys can check out Julia's webpage. You can check out her social media, and really just follow along on her journeys, because man, she goes to some really amazing places, grabs some of these amazing shots. And Julia, can't thank you enough for joining Stephen and I and sharing all your stories, your personal journey, and just these incredible photos with everyone.
Yeah,
thanks for having me on.
Yeah, absolutely. How's to you all out there, and we'll be with you next time. Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Looking to support Wolf Connection or sponsor one of the wolves in our pack? Just go to wolfconnection.org, click on the Donate tab, and find out more information.